Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about science. In this video, I'm going to discuss the worst crisis ever. A few months ago, experts were saying that the 100 part per million increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over the past century was going to destroy all life on Earth. The extinction was so bad that people had to pack the streets of Melbourne for weeks, blocking traffic and commerce. United Nations experts said that we only had until the year 2000 to stop the problem. After the year 2000, entire nations would be wiped off the face of the earth. And last November, more than 11,000 experts said that we needed to reduce Earth's population by 50%. That sounds like a pretty bad crisis, with entire countries being wiped out 20 years ago. I'm not sure which countries they were, but 11,000 experts couldn't possibly be wrong. Extinction from carbon dioxide sounds like a pretty big threat, but overnight the world changed. A virus appeared which was going to make you die a long, protracted, horrible death alone in a hospital. And not only that, if you stepped out of your house, you were going to kill 40 other people too. This virus necessitated that governments shut down business and lock everybody up in their homes. Police in Australia arrested this woman and traumatized her child because she wanted to work. The virus was so bad in the United States that it forced government to throw the First Amendment out the window. People no longer had the right to go to church, use free speech, or peaceably assemble. This virus was so bad that government had to ban people from exercising their constitutional right to go to church. All professional sports had to be shut down immediately. And children, who are barely affected by this virus, had to be kept out of school for at least one school year and possibly two. So global warming was no longer the worst crisis ever. Now we had a new crisis. This crisis was so bad that we had to put 40 million Americans out of work. But then, a few days ago, a new worst crisis appeared. A violent criminal with a history of targeting women was killed by government employees in the most liberal city in America. This led the press to immediately determine, without any evidence, that the cause of this crime was white supremacy. And suddenly we had a white supremacy crisis, which was worse than the virus crisis and definitely worse than the global warming crisis. Children couldn't go to school, you couldn't go to concerts or sporting events, and you definitely couldn't work. But it was okay to pack the streets in huge mobs and loot and riot. The press and academic experts suddenly reversed their opinions. Overnight, social distancing didn't matter anymore. And the 40 million people were put out of work and threatened with homelessness and hunger. They didn't matter either. All that was important was this violent thug who was killed by the police. The same health experts who demanded the lockdowns and people being put out of work now said that systematic racism was much greater danger than the virus. Not that these health experts ever produced any evidence of systematic racism, but as far as they were concerned, people had to stay locked up in their homes unless they were out protesting white supremacy. School, work, sporting events, and concerts are just too dangerous, but viruses know not to target social justice events. We know this because experts say so. But let's take a step back from the junk science of academics for a minute and look at some real science. Dennis Rancourt from the Ontario Civil Liberties Association has shown that the primary threat from the virus was government itself. He says, the latest data of all-cause mortality by week does not show a winter burden mortality that is statistically larger than for past winters. The places which did have high mortality were places where government sent sick people into nursing homes, which he described as mass homicide. The Wall Street Journal said, if you're an average American living outside New York City, the epidemic was a period with barely noticeable increased risk. Your chance of being an extra fatality was about 1 in 5,000, somewhat higher than your chance of dying in an auto accident. And if you're under 50 with no serious health conditions, your risk was in the ballpark of 1 in 50,000, similar to your risk of dying in a fire. If experts actually believed that crowds like this were going to produce an epidemic, they would be screaming their heads off instead of endorsing them. If each one of those protesters was going to infect 40 other people, we would have an incredibly huge epidemic. But the experts are endorsing these mass protests. It should be pretty obvious from the behavior of the experts now that we've been scammed. This was all a political ploy. They've moved on to their next political ploy. This graph shows Google trends for the term Black Lives Matter for the past 5 years. You can see that the only time when the press is interested in the term Black Lives Matter is right before presidential elections. 3 years ago, these two Nebraska policemen beat up, tasered, and killed an unarmed Native American. They're both back on the job now, and the press never followed up or gave this any sort of attention. They never accuse these men of being racist. The press simply moves from one worst crisis to the next. It's all about politics. It never has anything to do with science or social justice. But we are facing a very real crisis. Today is the anniversary of D-Day, when thousands of men gave their lives for freedom in Europe. But the press and social media don't care about or even remember freedom. They're too busy lamenting the death of a violent thug who menaced women. We have 40 million people out of work for absolutely no reason other than a political ploy to hurt the economy ahead of the election. As far as the press is concerned, the death of one violent thug is more important than millions of children facing homelessness and hunger. If we don't get this reversed, we're going to have a huge and very real public health crisis on our hands from all the homeless people. The discussion going on in the American press and social media for the past few years has been completely nonsensical. The press and social media control the narrative. They censor anyone with a different point of view. Our First Amendment rights have been stripped down to almost nothing. Dennis Rancourt, who did the study showing government homicide, did another very important study a few weeks ago. He did a very thorough review of scientific literature showing that masks don't work. After an unprecedented 400,000 views, his article was censored. Telling the truth is no longer permitted in much of science. My climate research has been censored by the press for many years. They refuse to debate me, and instead they simply censor me. The press and social media, who are supposed to be the defenders of free speech, have become its very enemies. One fake agenda after another is destroying our civilization. They've already put 40 million people out of work. Cities are being burned down, and the expert duplicity about social distancing is on full display. George Washington said, "If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter." And Ronald Reagan said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same." Ronald Reagan also said, "To sit back hoping that someday, someway, someone will make things right is to go on feeding the crocodile, hoping he'll eat you last. But eat you he will." I recognized the dangerous state we were in many years ago. That's why I started relentlessly exposing the climate scam. My work exposing the truth over the last 12 years has cost me many jobs, many contracts, and a lot of money. But I recognized how dangerous the threat was and realized that it had to be done. If not me, who was going to do it? The fact that so much money and effort was going into pushing a big lie told me that something very serious was going on. The enemy is no longer Germany, but it is people of the same mentality. The press, many politicians, and social media have shown over and over again that they want to take our freedom away. One of the most important freedoms is the ability to work and support your family. But that freedom has been taken away for tens of millions of people. The press and social media worked hard to put 40 million people out of work over social distancing, and then suddenly said, well, social distancing doesn't really matter anymore. The greatest threat ever changed overnight from carbon dioxide to a virus. And then a few weeks later it changed overnight again from a virus to white supremacists. The people destroying America now have zero integrity. People need to understand this if we're going to move forward and retake the beach. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on a lot of things for a long time.